Yeah, welcome to the part two show. I made a video a couple months ago regarding the coronavirus and my thoughts on what's been going on geopolitically since 2020. And now I'm about to, discuss the new paradigm. Basically, I made the last video in April. We're in July right now of 2020, and subsequently within the next couple years you could probably follow these videos back and they'll still be relevant even to that day. So let me break what I want to talk about today is racial injustice, the world paradigm, the strategic apparatus of the entire world as well as domestically in the US, but specifically focus on black people and see what's been going on and what the real agenda is behind everything with the George Floyd, Ahmaud, Aubrey, and Breonna Taylor uh, killings, as well as subsequently these lynchings that have sparked protests, upsurge, and a new wave, if you want to call it, a new worldwide, um, if you want to call it, civil rights restart. But I'm going to call it the revolutionary black era that finally ends this oppressive system and decadent structure upon us in all forms, basically, aka ending the Black Holocaust in all forms, and us reclaiming our rightful status as the rightful rulers of the planet. So Let me first start with the situation that first transpired. As I was saying in the last video back in April, I kind of already felt like this situation was going to happen. As soon as the Ronas thing hit, as soon as they dropped that, bioweapon, both with the Fort Detrick lab in the U.S. on the U.S. population, and as well as to Wuhan, to the room. This let me because I have more information on it now. Let me more so clarify this bioweapon situation that we've been into. So the ruling class basically was seeing that both their apparatuses, both in China as well as in the US, wasn't obeying their dictates. So subsequently, and also as a reaction to what's been going on and as well as the pedophilia that they're involved in, on top of their economic downturn, we've been in a depression since September. We've honestly been in depression since '08 when the financial crisis first happened. We really haven't gotten out of it, and it's just been kind of, lagging on. But more specifically, in September, there was already signs that there was something going on. So you cuff all that into one also with the election. You coordinate all of that. The ruling class had already sensed, as well as the Hong Kong apparatus, which was basically the attempt by the CIA and MI6 to color revolutionize or seize control of Hong Kong because they were seeing that China wasn't abiding by the Anglo-American dictates. So, you know, that wasn't going as well as they thought. The color revolution that they tried to push in Hong Kong. So as a result, they hit their next strategic brinksmanship, which is the bioweapon. And notice the bioweapon is now in Beijing, which is where the ruling class Chinese princelings stay at. So, you kind of already see that game. And domestically here, as well as a way to curry Trump, basically, because their attempts to rein in Trump and rein in him not going or doing the agenda the way they needed to be done also was a result of that. Remember, they tried to impeach him. They were trying to get him out of the paint with a whole bunch of different measures, and it wasn't working. So that was a double attack by the ruling class to basically entangle and to more so consequently maintain their rule the way they want it to be run. That's why you're seeing so much favoritism behind Biden because he's the perfect, he's the pliable choice. He meets the ruling class's dynamics. He's a good puppet that they can push out to continue the agenda the way they want it as well. Trump isn't like he's a plutocrat and he's a puppet of them too, but he just doesn't do their strategic um, agenda and apparatus the way that they want it done. And also with some of the things he does, he cancels out some of the things that they want done. For example, the WHO and, all of the vaccines that they want to push onto us. He by proxy, he's not. That's what I'm saying. I want people to understand this. He's not good for black people. He's decadent. He's a piece of shit. He's a racist and Confederate, a copperhead on the model of a Woodrow Wilson, a la 100 years ago, basically a Northern copperhead, basically. So he's not anything good, but when evil fights evil, the good can benefit. So right now, the ruling class is fighting uh, the right wing apparatus, and that's clashing. And some of the stuff that's happening benefits us. So as I go back to where I wanted to strategically start everything at, is the George Floyd killings, the Ahmaud Brooks killings, and the Breonna Taylor killings, and then how that encompasses a historical ramification within Black society, domestically here, so the foundation of Black Americans, and more strategically through a global game by the ruling class against Black people around the world, whether they know it or not, but more specifically here. So we know this. We know this shit goes back to enslavement, colonialism, oppression, the whole one too. We know where this shit or originates from. So with the George Floyd killings and the Ahmaud Arbery killings. I don't know why I keep saying Ahmaud Brooks. Ahmaud Arbery killings. I got NFL in my mind. Y'all remember Ahmaud Brooks from the 49ers, but Ahmaud Arbery killings, as well as the Breonna Taylor killings, it showed that this white supremacist system and their decadence and their ability and their need to keep us under a heel and coat, basically. And it strategically tells you more, as well as that there is a sanctioning and a policy of outright genocide, if you can put it just like that. The reasoning for this, the reasoning for the police being able to do what they do, backed by policy, backed by politicians, backed by big money, backed by the banking elite, and backed by the ruling class who controls the reality itself, is because the ruling class needs to maintain their power base. They need to maintain control. They need to maintain the way that they rule. What's been going on since, honestly, since we freed ourselves out of slavery when we won the Civil War, that's another discussion for another day. But since that time period, there has been a continuation of a need to subjugate the blacks, as Trump called them, us, black people, foundational black Americans, and black people around the world, but foundational black Americans more specifically, and black people just in general within the U.S. So, of course, right after we freed ourselves in 65 to 77, we had the betrayal of 1877, where they basically allowed the slavery system in a new form. So you got the black codes, Jim Crow, and thus subsequently. And then after that, you got a new form after they assassinated all our leaders, CIA ruling class, they and the FBI, on orders from the ruling class, assassinated all the leaders that we can talk to. You can look up Martin Luther King's family winning a civil lawsuit back in the 90s proving that he was assassinated by the government. Look all that up. And look up names like Dick Gregory, Steve Coakley, and that'll give you a basis to start your research on. So back to what I was talking about. So basically, so after the 60s, you got, after the reaction of the late 60s with the black people rebelling against this decadent system, the ruling class, as a punishment, assassinated the leaders and started the process, because the rank and file blacks, black family, men, women, and the kids were all in a unified front against the power elite. That's what this whole thing was about. Is this what they were doing was not only just for some civil rights, it was revolutionary because there was demands to become, for them to finally be free, basically. Whether they knew what they were fighting for or not, that was the overall basis, to be free of the system and to subsequently be in charge of the system. So after that Black Power upsurge, you got the deindustrialization of the inner cities in the 70s, as well as the starting of the drug epidemic and the crime epidemic in the 70s, the breaking up of families, the introduction into feminism to break up and cause a split between men and women. That was done strategically during the civil rights era to break up the unification between black men and black women. And that kind of worked ever since. Then in the 80s, you got the crack epidemic, the mass incarceration epidemic, the private prisons. You got three strikes and you're out in the 80s and 90s, the 94 crime bill, the forming of gentrification, and as well as a immigrant population brought in mass to replace the working blacks and the tradesmen blacks that were financing the civil rights era. So you got that as well. All of this was a punishment to black people for rising up. And then, of course, in the 2000s and 2010s, gentrification heavy, a continuation in the private prisons, a negative portrayal within the media, music, and movie apparatus. So if you look at the movies and the music, it's always a negative connotation. It's always self-destruction and black on black violence being promoted and black on black theft being promoted. Um, and these companies, these music conglomerates, are all owned by white or Jewish banking elite. So, you could look at the three majors, Warner Brothers, Sony, and Universal, and look at who owns these rappers that talk about the continued fratricide of their brothers, basically. So, and then of course in the 2010s with Obama, you got the introduction into the LGBT apparatus, which is another form of depopulation. Because if you can effeminize a man to not want to be a man and over masculinize a woman to not be a woman, then there you go. You have no next generation. All as a reaction to our upsurge. So back to the George Floyd situation, basically. I feel like with all of that, with all of the protests and the upsurge, black people just kind of had enough. There had already been a consistent loyal base who had been speaking that real since day one, man. I like to put myself in that mix. I have been on this tip, man, for at least a good little decade, man. More specifically within the last 5 years, but more generally, honestly, since I've been born, I never kind of backed down or ever assimilated or became the white man's nigga in any context. And anytime I was challenged on that front, I always did my best to challenge and counteract against that. But we got to talk about the protests to some extent. When you look at the protests and how they've been co-opted, you can kind of see what's been going on, basically. So this need for them to have a gender divide, the need to put in the depopulation movement known as LGBT, that's a way of spinning the argument away from black oppression by white power and by the ruling class into gender wars and divide and conquer LGBT strategies, basically. Because, hey, if you put up, hey, a trans lives matter, I'm like, in a protest that has nothing to do with sexuality at all. This is about the black family structure staying alive. This has nothing to do with no sexuality. And if you look at it from a more concrete context, why are you pushing an agenda that has nothing to do with what we're protesting and what we're going for? You know what I mean? Above and beyond the actual ending of this genocide campaign in physical means and in all forms. And why aren't you giving any economic uh, layouts to that? You know what I'm saying? Because before the protests were going on, the political landscape had been dominated by black people saying we want reparations. Foundation of Black Americans want reparations and demand reparations and are entitled and are graciously owed reparations. Even the United Nations been said that years ago for not only slavery but for Jim Crow and the continued genocide and oppression of black people. So you can clearly see that they've spun the message. So they spun the message so they can cause infighting because they know as soon as you start making an agenda divide, they already have their cells implanted because they've already indoctrinated certain groups that have our skin tone but don't have our minds and our soul. So what's going to happen? There's going to be foot soldiers already ready, and so you're going to have a divide and conquer strategy right there. And so when you come out and you're like, hey, we're specifically talking about black people ending the genocide campaign, then they're going to be like, hey, what about women's issues? What about the sexism by black men? What? I'm like, what the fuck does that have to do? We're trying to end the oppression in all forms, specifically to white oppression on black people, or those enforcing white oppression, white power upon black people. Because what they'll do is they'll be like, oh, well, a Hispanic did it or another black guy did it. But they're still doing the apparatus of the ruling class. So when we know the game. So you know what I mean? So it's just there's too much of this strategic brinksmanship, and it goes even more concretely to Black Lives Matter, basically. So when you look at Black Lives Matter, the organization, it's funded by Soros. This movement is independent of any organization, and this movement is specifically done by the grassroots, not by no top down apparatus. It's done from the bottom up by loyal, true people, black people, everyday, day to day people who just want to see a better life for people who look like them and people who are under the gun, basically. So that's what it is, man, honestly. And so, and we want to see justice, of course. You know what I mean? These people, the fact that Breonna Taylor hasn't even gotten, you know, gotten no charges done for the officer who did that is decadent as hell. That's bullshit. And I'm against that all the way. But I don't want to see no gender divide. I want us to stay on the tip. You know what I'm saying? I want to stay on that Shiraz Ali tip, that Dr. Khalid Muhammad tip, where it's the man, the woman, and the youth and the elders all on code, fighting for the right to make moves. And so you have to look at this diversity thing that they want to claim, where, oh my God, it's not just black people in these protests. It's all colors. That's being paid for, and that's being pushed as a co-op, which was done during the 1960s as well, during the March on Washington. But a lot of people don't know Malcolm X. You can go listen to Malcolm X's speech on the March on Washington, when he clearly um, shows that that was a co-op in order to change it, because in the beginning the March on Washington was by the grassroots, by those who were of the rank and file, you know what I'm saying, because of their um, inaction, basically, to give justice to black people. So the rank and file got in it, but then those in power, the liberals, came in and co-opted it using counterinsurgency forces. That's a basic tactic, man. Basic tactic of the ruling class, basically, and intelligence agencies that are the enforcement arm of the ruling class. And also this symbolism nonsense that they're trying to take down all the names and statues and junk like that. Yeah, that's cool and all, but we can do that once we gain power. The name of the game is economic justice and military justice and political justice. That's the name of the game, not some symbolic nonsense, bro. That's not going to change our day-to-day lives. You know what I mean? Why isn't there immediate charges being prosecuted? Why isn't there a bill that says any officer who kills an innocent black man gets the death penalty? That's point blank specific, and it must be enforced. Anybody who doesn't enforce that automatically goes to jail. You know what I'm saying? Like shit like that, real concrete, immediate stuff. Reparations automatically being given. You know what I'm saying? Paid for by the Federal Reserve, paid for by Wall Street sales tax, paid for by the spending that they obviously have money for everything but us for. You know what I mean? Look at that. Look at that. I'm just naming two things. And then military justice as well. You know what I mean? Our own community policing, where we look out for one another, and the police have no way of being able to interact within our communities unless they've already been approved by the people within that community. That's real push. That's real change. You know what I'm saying? That's a real strategic difference. But notice, that's not what the ruling class is talking about. That's not what their apparatuses and their media cartels are even talking about. Because guess what? That changes the whole dynamic of power. All of a sudden, you're in power now because you have the wealth, you have the media, and you have the military. And they can't control you no more. You know what I'm saying? And so that's what it is, man. The name of the game is power. The name of the game is who's in charge, who rules. And that tells us we have to go beyond just the idiosyncrasies of this justice. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, hell yeah, the motherfuckers who did this shit deserve to get that work and deserve to get the death penalty on sight. That's it. Of course, it's automatic. Like, that's already what it is. But beyond that, the ruling class must be put out in front street as the purveyors for this decadency. They're the ones who push this shit. Remember now, the police follow policy. Policy is set by the politicians. Politicians are owned by money. Money is owned by this banking cartel and the elite within that structure. You know what I'm saying? And the elite within that structure is this international ruling class. You know what I'm saying? That owns shit behind the scenes. That is in charge of the world order as such. And that's what it is. So we have to focus the aim on the top. That's who's in charge of the shit. Yeah, of course. Make sure that those within that condominium get justice. You know what I'm saying? But that's not where it ends. It starts at the top. You handle the top, then everybody else at the bottom will have to answer for justice as well. You know what I'm saying? And this pedophilia thing that's